Well, welcome. Good afternoon, good evening for those of you in the various time zones and forever what time zone you may be watching this playback. You have had an opportunity now to review the Nikan Opportunity products, business plan, our system, and are at a point of making a decision, perhaps a decision of a lifetime. I know for me, that happened in 1991, December 1991. My name is Mike DiMuccio. I'm a Royal Diamond with Nikan. I've been involved with Nikan for 26 years, believe it or not. And I remember very definitively the moment I made the decision that I made, and subsequently the feeling associated with that decision and what happened thereafter. So today's topic is really about decisions, decision making. It's not something that we're actually taught. It's not a part of our curriculum as we grow up in school. And so I think one of the things that you'll find synonymous with success is successful people are in the habit of making decisions. In fact, one of my mentors, Bob Proctor, was always refers to a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, in which he was always quick to point out one of his favorite chapters on decision making, the importance of making decisions, and how successful people tend to make their decisions quickly and change them rarely, if at all. Whereas people who hesitate often, are indecisive, these are not necessarily people who rise above their stations in life. And I think there's a reason for that. And it comes back to some of the things that you've already reviewed. So if I may, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and the information on it, because you've seen this. You've seen this slide already once before. Let me go ahead and make some room for that. Okay, so what you see here is the idea of compounding. That compounding is something that we are doing every single day of our lives, whether we're doing it consciously or unconsciously. We are in fact compounding. So it's the small choices, the consistency, and the time that creates the behavior and the habits that eventually shape our lives, and the results that we experience in our life are simply a consequence of that. The important question to ask is, are the decisions and choices you're making based on what you desire, or are they just simply based on habit? And even more impactful, the habits of others. Where did you learn to think the way you think? Where did you form your beliefs and so forth? We got that from early stages in life, based on the surroundings, based on the way we were brought up, the culture we were brought up in, the influences, our education, etc. All these things have an impact. And the impact is it develops our way of thinking, and subsequently our choices, our behaviors, and our habits. So for instance, people who are entrepreneurial or are born into an entrepreneurial family, particularly one that has been successful materially, tends to repeat that behavior because they adopt the thinking process and the principles of the people who they were influenced by. And there's an amazing book out there that was written by a guy named Robert Kiyosaki. In this book, he explains this concept of having been raised by essentially two parents. One was his paternal parent, the other one was a friend's parent. His paternal parent did very well in terms of employment as an employee working for the state of Hawaii, but the greatest influence he got was from his entrepreneurial friend's father, who was a multimillionaire. And while they would talk about things related to money, the answers that he would obtain from one father versus the other were vastly different, even though they were talking about the same thing. And it's pretty much what you see on this graph here. We could be talking about the same thing: income, health, relationships, happiness, success. But depending on how you think about those things, and subsequently the choices, the behaviors, or the habits you're into where those are concerned, they will lead you down the path that you're on. The question is, what is the path you want to be on? You've been presented with an idea, an opportunity, where the information that we allow ourselves and give ourselves access to starts to shift the trajectory of the way we think, the way we choose, our behaviors, etc. I'm going to ask all to please mute yourselves. And I'll just go ahead and do that again. Okay, so with respect to the habits you may be in, this may be the first real decision-making point for you where you could literally change the trajectory of not only your life, but the lives of countless others. Going back to my decision in 1991, I was introduced to this. I didn't have a high station in life. I was an employee. I worked for an electrical contracting company. It wasn't what I wanted. And yet there I was. I had suffered an injury. And so I was just going along my merry way, busy, 14 to 16-hour day busies, six days a week, with very little time to think about my future, even though I knew this wasn't what I wanted as a future. And I had lots of ambition. I mean, I was a graduate of aerospace engineering. I was in a recording business for a time. So I had a sense of what I wanted my life to be, and it wasn't punching a clock or running somebody else's business. But there I was, in the habit of waking up and going through the motions of that day in and day out. It's hard to break out of that habit, especially, as I can understand, when you have dependencies or dependents that you have to deal with, like a mortgage, etc. So that was the course of my life. It was one moment in time that changed the trajectory of not only my life, but the generations to follow. My kids have now an education that's completely different than the one they're getting in school. They're learning about decisions, choices, habits, and behaviors that are very different than the cultural norms or the social norms, which, by the way, if you consider the trajectory of all social norms and cultural norms, where do people end up on this graph? Do they end up living the life of their dreams, or they just exist day to day and they manage their expectations, which usually means they lower their expectations to meet their circumstances rather than raise their circumstances to meet their expectations? What is the norm that happens in time? Well, we all know the answer to that question. So when we consider this other thing that we've been looking at from the previous presentation, particularly that box image, the idea of being in a box, what you know is what you know. And what you don't know is what you don't know. And there's things that you don't even know you don't know. And it's those things that are preventing you from being able to break out of that box. But surely there are people in the world, especially when we look at the economics, there are people who are not in that box. And you would gain tremendously from their instruction, from their guidance, from their ability to shape your thought processes and help to redirect your beliefs and your behaviors and subsequently your habits so that you can shift from the left side to the right side. Now, consider this. Where you are right now, your present results, it's what you know. These are the things that you know, your circumstances, the situations that brought you into those circumstances. Here you are trying to make a decision. So the decision you're likely to make is the one where you think you can. I think I can, or I think I can't. Let me give you an example of this. Let's say we stood on a street corner and I asked you to count all the cars that are red. And I'm going to come back in an hour and you're going to give me a count of all the cars that are red. I come back, my guess is you would have a pretty accurate count of all the cars that passed by that were the color red. Now, if I asked you how many of those cars were blue, you would look at me with a very confused and puzzled look on your face, meaning you didn't know how many were blue. You're not denying that there were blue cars. In fact, there were many different color of cars passing by, but you had your mind focused on, trained on the information you were looking into, receiving, and quantifying was that information about the red cars, even though all around you were other cars, meaning other possibilities, other opportunities. We tend to only see what we can see based on what we're focused on, based on what we've been conditioned to see. So if you were to make a decision right now based on what you know, chances are you're going to continue to get the same results as what you continue to get. If you make a decision based on what you think you can do, or whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're still making that decision. By the way, just an FYI, my personal conviction and belief is that our excuses are the little lies we tell ourselves when we don't want to take responsible for the decisions we're making and the choices we're making, which ultimately lead to whatever they lead to, the consequences that we're familiar with. So if we make the decision about what we think we can do, we're making that decision still from the framework of what we believe is possible for ourselves. And there's not a lot of emotion in that because it's usually a marginal betterment of your life, a small improvement, which is not a huge emotional windfall. And therefore, the effort that it takes to engage in a business, another opportunity seems so much more because there's not a lot of emotion behind it. The fuel that fuels our purpose and our passion is just not there. So I don't suggest you make a decision about getting involved on what you think you can achieve or what you think you can do. I suggest you go to the C line. In the C line, I doubt you can see that on the screen, so let me move my camera here. This is what you really, really want. Going back to those ideas of health and relationship and finances and success, what do you really, really want? In your heart of hearts, what do you really, really, really want? My guess is it's a lot more for yourself and your family. And if we really dissected it, there'd be a lot of fuel, a lot of passion, a lot of purpose, a lot of reasons why this would be a better outcome for you and your family. So why don't we make that decision? Consider this, whether it's the A line, the B line, or C line, these are just gradients. In fact, they're all connected. They're just higher levels of awareness. What you know, what you think you know, and then there's that area of what you really, really desire, but you don't think you know. And even if you don't, do you need to know to make that decision? Let me give an example. How many of you have purchased something that you couldn't afford? If somebody says to me, Mike, I don't have the money to get started, I said, is that a reason not to do it, or is that a reason to do it? This is a financial opportunity. Well, obviously that's a reason to do it, but I don't have the money. What do you need the money for? You haven't made a decision to do it yet. How many of you made a decision to buy a house that you couldn't afford? Well, then what did you do? You convinced the bank to lend you some money. So you made the decision to buy before they lent you the money. And then you had to convince them that you were somebody they could lend the money to. You see, what happens is we make a decision, and then from the decision comes the impact of our decision, the subsequent choices that we make, the moves that we make to modify our circumstances in order to accommodate the decision. How many people say, well, I don't take a vacation because I don't have the money? Really? You don't take a vacation because you don't have the money, or you don't take a vacation because you never made a decision to take the vacation? Because if you did make the decision, what would you then do? If it was a decision to actually go for it, what would happen next? Well, the idea of the red cars would fade, and now you would start looking at the blue cars, the possibilities of how you can fund or finance that decision. And that's what has to happen each and every time we make a decision that could change our life. We need to ask ourselves, is it what I want, or is it what I think I can have? The think I can is such a weak position that it leaves you stranded without the fuel and the fire to really have the conviction to go forward. But what if you made the decision based on what you really want? Have you seen here that you've been exposed to an opportunity to transform your life? Is it there? Is that possibility there? And I'm not talking about marginally. I'm talking about a significant change. The quality of life that's possible is enormous. Now, let's go to the idea of what you really, really want. If you really, really want it, then there are people, even on this call, in your surroundings, within the context of this opportunity, who are outside the box, who are living the life that you would like to live, who could guide and assist you, and who would make themselves available to you, such as on conferences like this and others, where you now gain access to the information that would enable you to make the choices, develop the beliefs, and the behavior that inevitably lead to this new reality. It's by giving yourself access to the information that that possibility comes into view, into your field of view. And so I suggest when it comes to making the decision of a lifetime, like this business, this opportunity to transform your life and the lives of others, Take it from the position of what it is that you really want in life, and know that there are people to support and guide you and moving forward toward that reality. So what do you really want? That's the decision that we have to come to, or the question that we have to come to. What do you really, really want? Let me share with you a poem, and then we'll just open this up a little bit. This is the genius and power and magic of a decision, why it's so critical that we learn how to make decisions, and what are the consequences of the decision. The decision gives us access to information we would not have otherwise had. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans, that the moment one definitely commits oneself, providence moves. That's that idea of things coming into form that you didn't have access to until you made that decision. All sorts of things occur that help one that would never have otherwise occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance, which no man could have dreamt would have come his way. I have learned a deep respect for one of Goethe's, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but it's Goethe or Goethe, whatever, couplets. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. I want to share with you one story before we open up here. A number of years ago, I had an opportunity to meet a young man who was interested in changing his life. Now, he came to me dressed in a suit, looked great. We had an interview at a hotel lobby about Nikken. He told me he had nothing. I mean, literally nothing. In fact, he didn't even have the money to register to become a Nikken wellness consultant. So I thought I would share with him something I had learned from one of my mentors, a story, the idea that until he makes a decision, he doesn't need the money. And I told him, I asked him, do you have any kids? He said, no. I said, well, I just want you to imagine you had a daughter for a minute. And I want you to imagine that this daughter was in a medical situation that required urgent attention. In fact, it was going to cost about $10,000 for this person to have the medical attention that they needed. What would you tell your daughter? Would you tell your daughter, I don't have the money? He said, no. In a very thick French-Canadian accent, he said, I'd find the money. I'd get the money is actually what he said. I said, okay. And I said, why would you do that? He says, well, you're talking about somebody's life. And I nodded. Exactly. Of course, what I was implying was we were talking about his life. And so I sent him off thinking I probably would never hear from this guy again, because there was one of the pearls of wisdom that had been shared with me. I shared with him, and who knows if he really understood the hidden meaning behind all that. 3 months later, I got a phone call. I was in Toronto. He was in Montreal. Big, thick Canadian, French-Canadian accent says, I got the money. First words out of his mouth on this phone call, I got the money. Wow. I asked him, is this so-and-so? And he said, yes. And I said, oh my goodness, I'm surprised. I'm happy about that. Tell me your story. And he told me. He said he went and got a job walking on the streets of Montreal during lunch hour, selling people long-distance calling cards. He got so good at selling long-distance calling cards, he'd walk backwards as they were walking to lunch. Do you have your long-distance savings card? Anyway, he was able to generate enough income that they actually put people under him to train. He could train them, and within 3 months' time, he became their top salesperson in the city of Montreal. Now, you would think that this guy would have continued on that trajectory. Seems to be doing really well at it. No, he did that because he wanted the money to invest to get his Nikken business started properly. Because he had learned from me that there were certain things that he needed to do, which included buying the products. And if he wasn't prepared to do even that, then how could I possibly educate him and work with him to develop the rest of the business, which would be far more complex than just simply finding some money to buy some products? Well, he did it. He not only had the money to buy the products, he also had money to put a down payment on a car, which he didn't have. And he became the first millionaire in Nican in Quebec, and President's Club member, et cetera, et cetera. So it was that story and the story that I shared with him that he was able to leverage each and every time he encountered the objection from someone in developing his business when they said, I don't have the money. He could say to them, I know exactly how you feel. And he would share with them his story, which included my meeting with him that day. So the truth is, until you make a decision, until you make a committed decision to change your life, you don't need the money, you don't need the time, you don't need the contacts. In fact, you don't need anything except what you're already doing. Just keep doing what you're doing. But if you want to make a difference in your life and the lives of others, you're going to have to think from a different point of view, a point of view that maybe you don't even have right now, a leap of faith, the idea that you could actually create for yourself a life and a lifestyle worth creating. And so you make the decision to look for the blue car. And all of a sudden, they start to appear. And what fades is what you take your mind off of. If you're looking for success, follow success. Follow the pattern of success. There are people here on this call who will work for you to develop your skills and your understanding of how to be successful in this business. It's a ready-made opportunity for the right person who's willing to make a change in their life for the better. And again, it comes down to the simple task, the thing that takes, I think I was asked one time, Mike, how long does it take to make a decision? How much voltage in your brain does it take to change your mind? I said, I think it's 1/1000th of a volt, something like that. So it's so little and so big at the same time. I hope that you hear something in this conversation that encourages you to maybe think outside the box, that sometimes we need to do something that we're not familiar with, just so that we can become the person that encompasses that possibility. Otherwise, we just stay in the box. If it's comfortable, stay there. If it's not comfortable, do something that's not comfortable. Make a decision to get out of it and open yourself up to the possibility of all the things that will come into view and come into form as a result of that decision. But the decision precedes everything. So I'm going to just end it on that, and I'm going to open up for some Q&A.